Coming up on The Big Story, why younger voters most likely voted against PAP in the election.
Singapore's testing rate for COVID-19 is tops in ASEAN with more than 1 million swabs done.
And China's economy bounces back from the shock of the pandemic and avoids a recession. Good evening, happy Thursday. Coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom, I'm Olivia Quay.
And I'm Haryanto Diman. Now subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never have to miss a single episode.
As the dust settles on GE2020, one of the lingering questions is how crucial was the youth vote? A nearly 9-point swing against the People's Action Party and the opposition winning a record 10 seats in Parliament.
So from analysts to politicians, many see this as indication of the need to better incorporate younger perspectives.
News editor Zakir Hussain joins us now to take this further. Zakir, given the election results, should PAP rethink its strategy to engage young citizens? If so, in what ways?
Well, I think it needs to first relook and find out, I think, and identify how much of its actions and candidates even did matter in swinging the young vote. We got the sense that support was fairly even across the board, although among the young, this desire for more opposition and greater diversity of views in Parliament was more pronounced. But at the same time, if you look at specific contests, I think in cases like Sengkang, where there was a larger proportion of young people, I think the fact that there were no women in the PAP's lineup and the fact that the Workers' Party slate was almost all youthful and spoke to youth concerns played a part.
Zak, according to a Straits Times poll back in February, young voters weren't leaning towards voting for the opposition. Their voting patterns were similar to their parents. What changed between then and polling day?
I think the 9 days of campaigning played a key difference. When my colleagues spoke to about 400 young people in February and March, they found out that 36% of people were inclined to support the PAP and 16% were inclined to support the opposition, and a large number of people in between had not decided. But when, over the 9 days of campaigning and when they saw who was contesting and the lineup and the issues that were raised, I think the softer issues like representation in Parliament, call for checks and balances, and even a position on issues like the minimum wage and climate change, that possibly swayed the young. I think one factor was also this element of hardball politics, where the PAP coming out and calling the WP to make clear its stand, for instance, on the issue of Ms. Raisa Khan in Sengkang. I think issues like that turned off a lot of young voters, and those who were not decided then that they would back the WP side. And I think you see this nationally as well, even though the candidates were not in their constituencies, many young voters were voting for the opposition candidate.
Social media, alternative media, civil society organizations. To young voters, some of these outlets served as echo chambers for the opposition. How can PAP counter or align with these voices?
I think it's a tough call. I think one issue, and I think the PAP has done some of this, is to speak up on issues that concern the young. And these include a discussion of race and religion that's more open. These include taking up causes like climate change. And I think you see that in a number of candidates fielded. So you've got Louis Ng, who's quite passionate about animal welfare, for instance, and other civil society issues. You had women's activist Carrie Tan. You've also had a number of social issues advocates on the PAP lineup. And I think the challenge would be for them to continue to be outspoken on some of these issues. And if needed, perhaps even break ranks with the rest of their party colleagues on some of these matters by being more forceful in speaking up on them.
Now that said, Zak, so where are we now? Is there a threat of young voters swinging too far in the opposite direction, away from the established government, to the point of almost becoming anti-establishment?
I'm not sure. I think yesterday Professor Chan Heng Chi gave a lecture where she reflected on some of these things. And the trend she noticed was that from surveys in the US, many of the young voters, millennials, continue picking up some of these issues, so they would continue to want greater diversity in Parliament, They would continue to want checks and balances and an opposition voice as they age. We're not sure how this might play out in Singapore. I think the conventional wisdom is that as they set up families, as they get children, as they start thinking about their retirement needs, they would be more conservative and back the establishment so long as they feel their needs are taken care of. We're not quite sure how this will play out here, but there's a sense that in past elections, some of this is actually happening. And you see that in the swing in favor of the PAP in the 2015 election. Yeah. Now that swing does appear a bit of an anomaly because on average, the PAP has only managed to get in the 60s when it comes to the share of the national vote. And I think the PAP will likely continue listening and adapting its policies and needs to continue to reach out to this group of swing voters in the middle.
Thank you so much, Zak, for weighing in on this matter and, of course, for coming on the show. That was Zakir Hussain, a news editor at the Straits Times.
Now, the Health Ministry confirmed 248 new COVID-19 cases today. 11 of them are community cases, comprising 2 Singaporeans or permanent residents, 7 work pass holders and 2 dependent pass holders. Investigations are being done for the other cases.
There were also 4 imported cases who had been placed on stay-home notice upon arrival in Singapore. Migrant workers living in dormitories make up the vast majority of the other cases. More details will be announced later today.
Also in the local headlines, according to a global statistics site, Singapore came up tops in ASEAN in COVID-19 testing rate. As of July 13th, Singapore has tested over 1 million swabs from around 520,000 people for the coronavirus, as well as conducted about 177,000 tests per million population. Brunei is second to Singapore with about 68,000 tests per million population.
The Education Ministry's approach to COVID-19 cases in schools will be to ring-fence and quarantine students or staff on as small a scale as possible. This as opposed to reacting with a full closure of schools. Education Minister Ong Ye Kung said today that parents and teachers seem to understand this approach, which he said was comforting. His remarks come in the wake of a false positive case in Jurong West Secondary School due to a mislabeled sample. Now, separately, Mr. Ong also said that conversations around race and religion should continue to evolve in school, as young people today have a different view compared to older generations. Such conversations play a big role in helping students navigate differences.
And Deutsche Bank's new Asia CEO will be based in Singapore, picking the city over Hong Kong at a volatile time for the Chinese territory. The decision comes as Hong Kong is embroiled in unprecedented political turbulence after more than a year of anti-government protests. This would be the first time in at least a decade that the German bank put its sole Asia CEO outside Hong Kong.
China's economy has returned to growth after a record plunge at the start of the year. GDP in the second quarter jumped 3.2% from a year ago as the COVID-19 outbreak was brought under control and lockdowns were lifted.
The bounce follows a 6.8% contraction in the first 3 months of 2020 compared to last year. China, the first country in the world to be hit by the pandemic, has been recovering slowly.
Now let's get some insight on the numbers from our China correspondent Elizabeth Law, who joins us from Beijing. Elizabeth, 3.2% growth was a better than expected figure, and it means that China has avoided a recession. But what does it mean for the rest of the world? Is it a hopeful sign for other countries?
Hi, Jan, and hi, Ollie. So this clearly means, as you quite rightly mentioned, it provides a sort of beacon of hope to the rest of the world. I think firstly because China was was the first country to be hit by this pandemic, and it quite quickly shut down its entire economy, because remember, we've spoken about this many times before about how shutting down the economy led to a contraction in Q1 GDP. But at the same time, if you look at this sort of recovery that we're seeing today, look at this chart that we have on the screen, the growth of 3.2% per quarter is still not quite the same as the previous quarter. I mean, from last year, where it's regularly 6 6% and above. So what this shows is that China's economy does have a little bit more to go before it gets back on track. But at the same time, this is a hopeful sign because this is about 3 months since the economy has properly reopened, and already we are seeing this. I think another thing that we need to take into consideration is the fact that President Xi Jinping today wrote a letter to global CEOs around the world. And what this means, because I think many people have been very, very concerned about the trade tensions between US and China, as well as the sort of political tensions between China with the US, the UK, Australia and Canada. So there are a lot of worries on that front. But what President Xi's letter this morning, we don't have a lot of details of it, but what this indicates to us is the fact that this shows that China is still open for business and they're keen to continue opening for business. And clearly this is very important when you are the second largest economy in the world.
For sure, but even though the China economy has bounced back, there are still some areas of weakness, particularly domestic consumption. Why is that though, Liz?
I've spoken to a couple of economists and also just regular men on the street on why they don't feel that they want to keep on spending, and basically it boils down to two things. So one is the fact that even though the government has been trying to push domestic consumption, including supporting businesses and supporting people by giving out things like consumption vouchers, and which we've talked about before here, these consumption vouchers actually do come with caveats that you can only spend them at certain outlets, and also the fact that you have to have minimum spending for some. So this is very unlike what the Singapore government has given out, which is cold hard cash. In theory, this is great because it tries to make people spend more, and it is more targeted in where they want people to spend their money. But in reality, people still are slightly worried about where exactly this economy is going, because look at that 3.2 figure. Even if it shows that it is on the way to recovery, there are concerns whether or not this is sustainable and whether greater storms could lie ahead. So it basically boils down to the fact that people just want to keep their cash just in case of a rainy day.
Now, with China in recovery mode, what does this mean for Singapore, who is a major trade partner?
Right. So I think first we need to take this back a few days, where Chinese President Xi Jinping had a phone conversation with Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, where he not just congratulated PM Lee on Singapore's electoral victory, but he also talked about how Singapore and China should continue to work together to boost both economies and to help drive businesses on both sides. I think it very, very importantly, China is the biggest FDI destination for Singapore. So there are a lot of business interests here, there are a lot of government-to-government projects, and this really does bode well if the economy is starting to recover, is starting to open up. It's great for our businesses. I think one thing that needs to be looked at now is going forward, because travel restrictions are still very much in place. So if China's economy continues to recover, one big question is, are they now going to try and open up a bit more so that business people can come in and people who are based here can come back, so that they can continue running their companies?
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Always a pleasure to speak with you, and certainly keep safe in Beijing. We were speaking to Elizabeth Law, China correspondent at the Straits Times.
Good evening, guys. I'm Dylan Ng. The official Twitter accounts of Apple, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos and others were hijacked on Wednesday as scammers tried to dupe people into sending cryptocurrency Bitcoin. Posts, which were largely deleted, were fired off from high-profile accounts, telling people they had 30 minutes to send $1,000 in Bitcoin in order to be sent back twice as much. The list of accounts commandeered simultaneously grew rapidly to include Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Uber, Bill Gates, Kim Kardashian and Kanye West, among many others. China's top representative office in Hong Kong condemned what it called gross interference by the United States in the Asian financial hub, labeling US President Donald Trump's move to end the city's special status as gangster logic and bullying. On Tuesday, President Trump signed an executive order to end preferential economic treatment for Hong Kong in response to the new security law. In a strongly worded statement, the Hong Kong Liaison Office said the sanctions would not have a substantial impact and rather damage the United States' own interests. Australia's second most populous state, Victoria, said 2 men in their 80s died overnight from the coronavirus. The state has also logged a record daily rise in new infections. Victoria reported 317 new daily cases, the highest since the pandemic began. The state's previous high of 288 new cases came last week. Movie buffs, take note, here's your chance to get hold of iconic props from Hollywood. Maverick's fighter jet helmet, Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber, Rocky's boxing gloves, and a 3.3-meter model of the Nostromo spaceship from Ridley Scott's Alien will go up for auction in Los Angeles next month. They are among the hundreds of items for sale on the live stream on August 26 to 27. But be prepared to empty your wallet. Pre-sale estimates put the Nostromo model at the top of the list at $300,000 to $500,000 US. The original bronze Ra medallion used by Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark is also expected to fetch up to $150,000 US. Those were the global updates. It's back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you so much, Dylan. So those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.